All right, how's that?
Better.
Looks good.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to be giving you a little introduction to compositing, and I say it's fun. Try it. So here's what this talk is about. I'm going to start with a little brief introduction of how I got into compositing, and then give you some places where you can find out more about it if you want to try it yourself. People often ask how I get my ideas for composites, so I've got a little bit on that. And then I'm going to give an example of some things to consider when you're creating a composite, talk a little bit about some useful tools, and then show you the steps that I took to create two of my composites, and then tell you what the next steps would be if you do want to go further. So how it began for me, my fascination with the composites began with Loren Resnick's work. He's a landscape photographer who also does commercial photography. And so I saw this ad. This is from his website. And this was an ad he did, which was for plumbing fixtures. And since he's a landscape photographer, he put them into the national parks. So this is Monument Valley. And when I first saw this, I thought, some idiot has gone to Monument Valley and destroyed it by putting this stupid whirlpool bathtub in it, and I was really mad. And then I realized it was a series of ads, and obviously they weren't real. And at that point, I thought, I really want to learn how to do this. So that's what inspired me. Compositing is a very big subject. My intent here is to give you a flavor of what is possible and some resources to explore if you want to try it yourself. I personally find videos are a very good way to learn. It's useful to see a new technique more than once, and if needed, you can replay a section over and over and over again until you get it, and I have very often done that. My two favorite sources for videos are creativelive.com. They have live broadcasts of their classes, which are free to watch. But if you want to watch them on your own time and be able to replay things, you can either buy an annual pass or you can buy individual classes. They very, very frequently have sales as much as 75% off. So if you give them your email address, you can find out about those. Also, YouTube has a ton of useful videos, and I talk about that a little bit more. Compositing instructors, some of my favorites are Jesus Ramirez. He is awesome. He's on YouTube. He's also on Creative Live. One of his very useful videos is how to match a subject into any background in Photoshop, which is for compositing. So that's kind of a good place to start. There's also Glenn Dewis, he's on YouTube. Ben Wilmore is on YouTube and Creative Live, and Brooke Shaden is on YouTube and Creative Live. I'm not a particular fan of her style of art, but her techniques are fabulous, and she's a very good teacher. One of the important things that you have to do for compositing, and I'm not going to go into this in detail, which is why I've got this big list of videos that you can watch. But since compositing is all about taking bits of several pictures and putting them together and choosing only the parts that you want to use, usually to do that, you create what's called a mask in Photoshop. And so there are many ways to select what you want. Some of the tools are, if you're in Photoshop, you go to Edit on the pull-down menu and go to Color Range. And so here's a YouTube video that shows you how to do that. Or there's Focus Area, Subject, or there's the tools that are over on the left, or not always the left, but on your toolbar. Quick Selection, Magic Wand, Object Selection, which is new in Photoshop, and Pen Tool. And so these tools tend to have different strengths for different applications. So probably a good idea to start with sort of a general one, maybe Magic or the quick selection tool is my go-to one because that's the one I learned first. But if you're going to do something really complicated, if you've got a selection with low contrast between the subject and the background, then something like the pen tool might be useful. So start with one, and then once you're comfortable with that, maybe watch a YouTube video about a different one and see if it does something that's useful to you. If it doesn't, don't bother learning it. Just go on to the next one some other time when you want to learn something new. Okay, so how do I create a composite? I use Photoshop exclusively. That's my personal preference. I'm too lazy to learn Lightroom because I learned Photoshop first. There are also other programs that work, but I'm only familiar with Photoshop. I constantly take photos of things that I might want to use in a composite someday. And so if I see a rabbit, I'll take a bunch of pictures of the rabbit, even though I know I'm not going to process any of them because they're not really that interesting as a standalone picture. But you never know when you might need a picture of a bunny, and you know whether you're going to need the bunny sitting up or running or turning away from you. So I just have this ton of photos that I've got arranged in folders by subject so that when I need to find a bunny, hopefully I have one and I don't have to go out looking for a bunny.
Ask a
Where do I
question.
get the ideas for an image? Some of them come from other people's work, sometimes paintings. Pinterest has all kinds of really interesting things. Sometimes I see something out of the corner of my eye and I think it's one thing and I realize it's not, but it gives me an idea once, from what I thought I saw. Or sometimes I just start with an image that I really like, but it's like it's not interesting enough by itself. And I don't know what to do with it, so then I just start playing around with it. So here's an example of a picture. I saw something similar to this on Pinterest, and I thought it was a really fun idea. So this is my brother's family. My sister-in-law particularly liked it. Here's another one I got from Pinterest, two pictures of the same person, put the one on the wall. So I liked the concept and then just sort of did my spin on it. This is an example of seeing something that gave me an idea for a composite, which I haven't made yet. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was a giant paint can up on the hill. And I thought, whoa, that's weird. And then I realized, of course, it was a tank. But then I thought, well, what if it was a paint can? And then you go from there. What if the paint can tipped over and all these colors were coming out? And then you're thinking, well, what happens when the colors happen? Are flowers sprouting up or are rivers forming? And so, just seeing something sometimes can kind of suggest an image to you. This is a picture that I took at the LA Zoo, and I quite liked it. I brought it in for a critique, and what I really like about it is the eyes and the mouth and that first paw that's close to you. And during the critique, Mark mentioned that it's difficult to emphasize those because the animal has natural camouflage. And so then I was thinking, well, what can I do to bring those out? What could I do in a composite? So I thought, well, I could have it coming out of a fog bank or coming out of the closet, but I didn't have a good closet for that. So maybe coming out of the wall, like behind somebody. But then finally I came up with an idea that I executed, which was this one. So, you start with the idea and then you play around, basically. Okay, so what do you have to think about though when you're combining pictures that were taken in different places? You know, how can you put pieces of very different pictures together and make them look like they belong together, like you took them all once with one shot? So you want pictures with a similar exposure because obviously if something's really dark and something else is light, they don't look like they belong together. You want the location of the light source to be similar because you want the highlights and the shadows to match up. And so to do this, you either have to choose originals that were shot with a light source from the same direction or have them shot in flat light. The picture that I showed you at the beginning with the whirlpool bath, Loren Resnick said that he actually shot the tub in a studio in flat light because he can always add highlights and add shadows, but you can't correct for incorrect, for shadows and highlights that don't match up. So that's how he likes to do it. Something else to consider are color differences between your bits and the original photos. You want a similar white balance, and you want the color of reflected light to be the same. So, for example, if you've got a red wall and you've got light bouncing off that wall and adding a red cast to one side of one of your subjects, either you have to correct for that, or you have to add that to the other subjects in that picture. You want the depth of field to be the same. If everything has very shallow depth of field, then it fits together. Or if everything has sharp all the way through, that's good. But if it doesn't match up that way, then it's going to look fake. And the other thing is perspective. Are you shooting from high, from low, straight on? So those are just some of the things that you have to consider. So here's an example of color in pictures. So let's say I want to make a composite, and I want to have something with the baby jumping onto the branch with the squirrel. So the baby was shot in light, which was very yellow, and the squirrel was shot outside, and so it's a cooler light. So you can see right away that there's some things that we're going to have to adjust here to make these look like they belong together. So if I was going to do this composite, the first thing that I should do, if I'm thinking, is to adjust the white balance. Sometimes I get excited and I forget this point and I have to do it later and it's a mess. But that's a good thing to start with. So here, back here, the baby was pretty yellow. Here, the baby looks more like she was shot with daylight. And then I do just a rough selection of the subject because I don't want to spend half an hour or an hour making a really clean selection and then finding out that these are not the originals I want to use. Maybe I've got different pictures that'll work out better. Then I resize the canvas because, back here, there wasn't enough room for the baby with the squirrel, and now I've added that. And I do sort of an initial placement of the subjects. So I do this and I go, well, that's not bad, that could work. So then I take it next. Paint in the blank canvas, cloned out some of the distractions of all those other branches, did some correction on the lighting on the subjects, took the squirrel out of the shadow and added some more light to the baby so it looks like they're in the same space. And so at this point, I decide, is this worth continuing? Well, what's wrong with this? I've got some shallow depth of field on those branches in the background. So they're pretty fuzzy, but they're not really adding to it. So I could clone those out if I wanted to keep going here. I've got the shadows on the branches. That could be kind of messy. That's always difficult. So I'd have to think about that. The legs of the baby aren't as bright as her arms, and so maybe I want to brighten those up a bit. Then I'm looking at the baby's legs. And I'm thinking, well, what if the baby was riding the squirrel instead? That could be fun. And then I'm thinking, well, maybe I should, look at the squirrel. Do I have a better picture of the squirrel? The squirrel maybe should be looking up at the baby. Maybe I should have the squirrel jumping. So this is why you don't want to invest a whole bunch at the very beginning of the composite if you have other resources, because maybe you want to switch out a different original for one of them. So that's just sort of how my thought process goes. If I was going to continue, in this example, when I did the selection of the baby, I just used the subject selection. And, you could see back here when the baby was pretty small, it looked pretty good. It looked like a clean selection. But when you get close up, you can see that it's kind of rough. It looks almost like torn edges of pages. And so if I was going to continue to use this, at this point, I would go in and I would mask it so that I would have a very clean selection. And how sharp the selection would be would depend on how much depth of field that I have. If everything else in the picture is a little soft, I would use a soft brush to create the mask and have sort of soft edges on the baby. If everything else in the picture was very sharp, I would use a brush that was harder and had a harder edge, and then have a very clean line in order to make the baby look like it had the same depth of field as the other things in the picture. Okay, so that's about colors and kind of the basic approach for that I take for composites. Some techniques that I've found useful are to explore different blend modes on layers and on brushes. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But also another technique are some popular manipulation tools. One of them is transform. And here I've got a YouTube video that explains that. But with transform, you can make something bigger or smaller. You can stretch it out. You can warp it. So that's always useful. Or you can go to the pull down filter, liquefy. Again, I've got a YouTube video, and with liquefy, you can warp and shape things even more. And then the last one I mentioned here is puppet warp. And if you've never heard of this, you've got to see it, because you can actually put essentially joints on a subject on a layer and then manipulate it like a puppet. So if that sounds interesting, watch the video. It's very, very cool and really fun. But getting back to layer blending modes, sometimes this can make your selections a lot easier than they would be otherwise, and it's something that a lot of people don't do. So I wanted to go through this a little bit. This is a picture of a bird that I shot, and the sky is blown out because I wanted to get the detail of the bird. And so if I wanted to add a blue sky, one way I could do it would be to make a selection of the bird and then put that on a layer, and then have a layer of a blue sky. But an easier way is this, which is where I've got the bird on one layer, and then I've got the sky on a layer above it, and you notice the sky is in darker color mode. And so what I've done here is I'm using Photoshop's ability to look at these two layers, and it looks pixel by pixel, and it says which layer has the darker layer, and whichever layer has the darker, or has a darker color, whichever pixel is darker is what you end up seeing. And so in this, since the bird is dark, except for in a couple of very small places, the sky shows up where everything was blown out, and the bird shows up for almost its entirety. The only place where the bird is not dominant here, and I'm trying to see, here we go. I want to see if I can annotate here. No, apparently not. Anyway, the bird's beak was also blown out, so if you, no, can't do that either. So anyway, the bird's beak is actually blue here. So what I've done in this next step is I've added a mask, and I've just painted black in where the bird's beak is and a couple of other places where the blue was showing through. But it's much easier than creating a selection of the bird, because what you get when you do it this way is you get this very, very clean image where you've got your sky showing up wherever it was white, and you've got the bird, and you don't have those little fuzzy overlaps that you get when you try to do a selection sometimes. Okay, so here's another example of using color dodge, which is a layer blend mode, in order to create something interesting. So let me go over to Photoshop now for this. So here's that same picture. So it's a starry, oh, wait, I forgot. I had one more here. Okay, so what I did was I wanted to take this picture of the starry sky, and I wanted to add something interesting to it. So I had this picture on the left, which is a picture I took by mistake with my phone once when I was putting it in my pocket. But it was an interesting texture, so I kept it. And then one day I was just playing around, and I used in Photoshop, it's a drop-down filter, distort, and then twirl. And so I created this kind of wave effect. So I thought, well, that's fun. And then I just had it in my library because I really didn't have anything to do with it at that point. I didn't have anything, anywhere to use it. But then later on, I was doing this, and I had the sky, and I thought, well, I want to add something interesting to it. So here's that twirl. I added that in a layer. And you see, let's see. I used the color dodge blend mode on this. And I'm going to have to over here. There we go. And then I decreased the opacity to about 87%. And I got that. And I thought, oh, I like that. So here I have a composite, and that took me 5 minutes. And then I wanted to do more, and so the rest of it took me about 4 hours. But that's the way it goes. So here's the two of them combined. So then I went into a topaz program, which gives me a fisheye effect. And that kind of reshaped it a bit. And then I went into topaz glow. And so I like that. Now notice that with the topaz glow layer here, I'm in color mode this time. So what you want to do when you have something that's interesting, that's what the layer looks like by itself. But you can just go down the list and see what it does. And so even when I think I know what I want to do, a lot of times I'll do that. I'll just kind of run that down, because sometimes they're pleasant surprises. Then I like this, but I wanted a little bit more. So I went back into Topaz Glow and used the contrast and color glow filter. And notice I've got that in overlay mode at 25%. So that's another thing I do, which is when I find something that I like, then I start playing with the fill or the opacity until I get it where I like it. So then I wanted a little bit more definition here in the middle, so I just painted in a little bit more. So that was pretty good, but it seemed like there ought to be something there in the middle. So I tried a number of things, but I finally ended up taking this portrait that I had, and then I did some warp on transform and warp, and a little bit of liquefy, and I came up with this, which is right now pin light with a fill of 39%, and then overlay at 79%. And so then I thought I was done. But then I went away for about a day and I came back and I thought, well, I like it, but maybe I'll try something a little bit more. So then I used distort pinch to get this, and then liquefy to get this final version. So you can see a lot of using blend modes, a lot of changing the fill or the opacity, a little bit of masking on this one, not too much. So this was a fairly straightforward one. Okay, let's go back to Keynote. Okay. So here's another composite. Let's see if I can. Ooh. Yeah, that's what I want.
There are some people that are not muted and occasionally get an echo, so if everybody could please mute, that would be awesome.
So composites can evolve. Here's one that I started out with a butterfly, and my idea was that you know how sometimes butterflies have round things that look like eyes on their wings. So I thought that would be fun to recreate that. So I decided to use the tiger for that. I wanted a clean background, so I had the picture of the this plant, which I took on a walk one day. And again, no idea when I was ever going to use that, but I like the shape of it. And then the bird and the sand ended up getting added in as the project evolved. Oops.
Peggy, hold on just a second. There's a couple of people that aren't muted. Would you please mute? Because we're getting feedback from you and it's kind of disturbing.
Dale's phone is one of them.
Whose phone?
It says Adele's phone, Adele's cell.
Yeah. If you could mute it, please, that would be great, Adele. Adele's cell. And also, Bobby, would you mute, please, too?
Me?
Yeah, Bobby. Bob,
Oh, okay.
thank you. And I will mute myself.
Okay, so these were the 5 originals that I ended up using to create this. So let me show you how I did that. So I started off with, I had that picture of the plant, which I like the shape of. And so I just cloned in everything to make a very clean background. So I just wanted the wall and the plant. And then I went in and I added, I wanted it lighter. So I took and did a fill on this layer and went to luminosity and set that so that I could lighten things up. And then I added a curves layer so that I could bring out the texture of the wall because I really like the texture. But then I was kind of losing the plant. So I made a copy of the original layer again and went darker color on that so that I could get the plant back in there. Then I made a selection of the tiger and put it on the butterfly. And when I made the selection of the butterfly, I had a problem selecting the antenna. And so I was going to go back and mask that in, but then as it turned out, when I put the butterfly in, it just lined up perfectly with the plant, and I liked the effect. So it was sort of a happy surprise. And at this point, I wanted to make, I thought the butterfly was too big. And so I made a second layer, and then I went transform, and I went to shrink it. And I was planning on getting rid of the layer behind it and doing that, but I actually liked the effect of the double butterfly. And so this is one of those things where you just kind of roll with what you see as you're going along, and you either accept things or you change them. But I liked that, so I kept it. Let's see. So then, at this point, I added some color to the background, and to do that, let's see. Well, anyway, the way I added it was I actually took that picture of the bird that I had before where I liked the colors, and I sampled the colors of this top and the bottom, and then I created a gradient and applied that across because I like the colors. And so here, now I'm sort of darkening things, adding a photo filter, a little bit of hue, saturation. So I'm just sort of refining it at this point.
Peggy, could you go back and show us how you put the tiger's face in the butterfly?
Well, that's just doing a selection of the. I don't think I actually kept that one because I don't keep all of. Yeah, I actually did that here. Hang on. I didn't know if it was going to work. So I had the butterfly. And then here I have the tiger. And then I just added a mask in color dodge at 100%. And that gave me the first suggestion of the eyes. And then I don't have it here, but I must have had another layer where I masked in more detail of the tiger. And so at this point, I felt like it was going to work, and so then I made the selection of the butterfly, and that's where I added it back here. So then I was pretty close to being done here, but I wanted a longer stem, and then I wanted to ground it, so I put in some of that sand, added a vignette, did a little bit more color refinement, and then I felt like I was done. And but then I did what I usually do, which is to go to black and white, just to, not because I really thought I'd preferred in black and white, but because it lets me see if I've got too bright of spots or too dark of spots. But I was pretty happy with that, and so I thought, I thought I was done. But then just for the heck of it, I went into Topaz Impressions and did their Georgia O'Keeffe filter because I love that one. And I liked it better than with all that texture I worked so hard to add. The only thing I did was, notice I've got a mask over here. I masked out the eyes because I wanted to keep the eyes sharp. So that's how I created that one. All right. So if this has inspired you to try compositing, I would suggest that you start simple. Learn new techniques as you need them. Don't try to learn everything at once. Just if you find you can't do something, find out what tool or technique it is that will help you achieve that. Or if you just hear about a technique that sounds like a lot of fun, you can just play around with something, create something just as a reason to learn that. But always play around. I mean, I've got tons of composites that I've created that at the end I go, no, but it was fun playing with it, and sometimes I refine my skills with it. So I think it's always worthwhile. Explore different subjects and styles. The possibilities are endless. And so here's some of mine. This was Manhattan Beach Pier reflections after a rain, and then I've got the ocean and the surfer at the bottom. Composites can be a lot of fun. Something Dick Merrick would appreciate, I think. This was a little boy who loves superheroes. This was just sort of a fantasy skater, which I was doing because I was having a lot of fun learning a new program. That's where all the colors in the background came up. Here's a little Star Wars fantasy. This boy was honestly, we shot the pictures for this in under 2 minutes, and this isn't even all of them. He was great. This was an expectant mom with their little girl. And I always do love the mother and baby pictures. So give it a try, and I hope you enjoy it.